Right, so we've got my mate Alex's GSI to do today. So we have obviously Z20LET engine, going to whip the head off it, get it skimmed, do the head gasket on it. It's pressurising the header tank at the minute. You can see where it just keeps splurting out. This is a pattern header tank as well, so I'll tell you about in a minute. But you can see, even with brand new cap, whatever, as soon as you come on boost or boost it for a little while, it just pressurises the header tank. It's alright on cruising, but it's just probably the head is slightly lifting, causing a compression issue between the cylinder and the waterway. I'm going to pull the plugs out, see if they've got any like dampness or anything on them. But I'm just going to time lapse this, get this head off because I want to get it off, done, going to get it skimmed. So if you're interested, carry on watching. Right, so as you just see, just pull off the head and checking the head gasket over and just checking the waterways between the combustion chamber obviously and the waterways itself. This is the original head gasket on the car, so it's done really well for the mileage. I was checking it all over, it looks all good on cylinder 2, 3, 4, but then when I got to cylinder number 1, you can clearly see there where the combustion has been getting into the waterways. So it's obviously when it's under boost, it's just pressurising the water system, so it's a nice clear sign we've got there that we've got a leak between the chambers. So that's exactly what I wanted to see, an actual confirmation. You can read the head gaskets pretty easily. They was better with the Cometic style ones, but you can still tell on these multi-layer head gaskets, but you can see how stuck on it is on there. This is the original one, as I say. So we're going to get to clean up the pistons, clean up the block, the head's getting skimmed, and then we'll get it back on. Right, so let's fast forward a couple of days now. You can see this is the head fresh back from steam cleaning and deep clean. You can see also we've had the head skimmed. Really important, this is the original head gasket on the car. You can see it's a virgin head, so it's got loads of meat left on it. So we've had it nicely cleaned up, so you can see it's been the machine all inside, all lovely and fresh and clean again. Now before I change these valve stem seals, because it's a no-brainer to change these valve stem seals while the head's off, I'm just going to put some petrol inside here, make sure all the valves are seating perfectly, because if they ain't, they'll be addressed when they're out. So that's basically what we're going to get to now. You can see the machining process on the head. They even deburred all the cylinder chambers, absolutely perfect. Really, really nice work. These are the machine shop that I always use for even my high power build. So I'm going to get this head prepped up now. Right, so there you go, I've just put the plugs inside the ports, and I've also filled the ports up with petrol, and I stick a dye in there as well just so I can see it. It's like a UV dye, I can shine a light on it, make sure there's nothing coming out the ports on the inlet and the exhaust side. I always like to do this when the head's off, because obviously you've got to have good compression inside the engine, make sure none of that compression is going out the exhaust or the inlet valves when it shouldn't be. This is working perfectly, as you can see. There's absolutely no fuel or anything going down any of these ports. The ports have been cleaned up the best they can with the heat tank. We're giving them a quick clean up when the valves are out. So we're going to have good compression now with a nice sealing head gasket. As you see, number 1 was leaking, and we've got no leaky valves. So getting these valves out now. We know we're going to put them back in the right order, and they're not going to leak. Get this head bolted back on. So I'm just going to do the stem seals now, pull them out. Right, so I've just pulled out one of the springs, and you can see in there we've got some stem seal retainers, which are actually nice. You can see they've been put in there previously, so the stem seals have been done, well, they look like they've been done quite a while ago, because them stem seals look quite tired actually, which is going to be nice to change them over to the GM ones. And they're black ones as well, the GM ones are green, so they're definitely not GM ones in there. Obviously the valves weren't smoking at all, the engine was not smoky at all, the turbo's perfect. So it could do with getting some new stem seals on there, so it's a nice thing to have the stem seal retainers in there, because obviously it allows a little bit more seat pressure on the springs. The springs in this are stock, they're not uprated ones, they're just stock springs, so you don't want to be having a high rev limit with these springs. So we're just going to get the rest of them out now, change them over, see which ones these are, and show you which ones I'm going to be using. Right, so the stem seals will fit into the head. Obviously, you know I only use the GM stem seals. Now, with the retainers, people can get away with using the cheaper stem seals. Obviously, they're the part number for the original ones. You can see on here, these ones are cheaper and they go brittle over time. You can see they've gone hard already, and that's what mainly causes the leak rather than them actually popping off. So even using the stem seal retainers, they're still going to leak at some point if that starts going hard and starts breaking down with heat over time. I've just found that the GM ones are by far the best ones I've ever used, and I've tested them all, and you can see obviously they're green, so it's the first way to actually tell inside the head what stem seals you've got in there. And you can see they're actually made by SKF, it says on here. There you go. So if you did source SKF ones, they're probably going to be the same. I haven't compared them side by side because they're cheap enough to get from GM, but you can see they're actually SKF units. So I always use the GM ones. If you don't want to use them, do what you want, but if you're going to use a retainer with a cheap one, you just band-aid in the problem basically using cheap stem seals. They're so cheap, I don't really know why people don't just buy them from GM cells rather than getting these. I think these are like 10 a pack, and these are probably like 20 quid a pack, so there's no big difference. So with these stem seals, obviously you do these the opposite way round to if you didn't have these retainers. So you put the stem seals on first, and then you put the retainer over the top, obviously to hold on the stem seal. I'm going to show you a little trick as well. The stem seals are just pushed on there, obviously with the stem seal tool. They're just literally loosely on top of the valve guide itself. And then what I do is I use a 11mm. I don't know why it's an 11mm, but it is. They're perfect size for it. And you literally just get it over the top with a little extension, and you just tap, tap, tap it, and you'll hear a note change when it's actually in place. Now, don't hit it too hard because you'll misshape this stem seal. So just tap it gently with a little bit of oil, and you'll hear the note change when it seals onto the valve guide itself. And then literally you can just drop these over the top, and they will fit in there perfectly. So I'll show you. Right, so I don't know how well this is going to sound in the video, but if you listen carefully, you will hear the note change when I tap on this stem seal. And there you go. That's the note change you're looking for. Basically, you'll hear it again on this one. So it's a nice soft note. And there you go. And that's sealed. Now I'm not hitting that hard, I'm literally just tapping it. That's why it's taking a while, because you don't want to misshape these stem seals. There you go, that's sealed again. So they're perfectly on there now. I'm going to do the rest of them quickly. So they're all in there nicely now. So we get the stem seal retainers, literally just drop them over the top. They line up pretty easily. So now we can just put the springs back in and we can get this back assembled. So I showed you guys recently, but I'll show you again. The quickest way to get these collets or keepers, whatever you want to call them, different countries call them different things. Literally just get some grease on the end of a screwdriver, and this acts as like an adhesive. But I use Vaseline, as you can see, and I literally will use a magnetic screwdriver. You can see the end of the screwdriver is magnetic, and it just helps. And you can just literally get in there, try and turn it around so you can see it, and just push it on like so, and then that is on the valve. And you just do the other side, and then you can let it off. I don't know how well you can see that. It's on there. Let's try and zoom in. There you go. You can see that on there. Try and get the other one on at the same time. It's a bit difficult because obviously the camera's in front of it and I can't really get to it very well, but I'll try. So yet again, just put some grease on there. As I say, just acts as like an adhesive. Attaches it to the valve and also attaches it to the screwdriver. And there you go, that's done. So you can see in there now that there's the two keepers on there nicely, and then all you do, just literally let off the tension, which is obviously under high tension, and then the spring will seat, and you will always have a gap in between, so don't think that you've done it wrong because there's a gap there. Can't really see it because the grease is in there. I'll try and wipe it off for you so I can show you. For the first time people doing this, don't think that there's actually a gap in there, so that's a problem. That gap is what stops this falling out basically. So if you look in there, it's a bit difficult to see actually because there's too much grease in there. But right, so the head's all built back up with all the stem seals, you see, all fresh, everything's looking good. Retainers, springs, everything's back in there now. So the head's ready to go back on. So I'm just going to show you what gaskets I'm using before I do bolt them on, because some of them are GM, some of them are not, and I'll show you the reasons why behind that. Right, so as you can see here, the head gasket set I'm using is the Victor Ryan's one. This is for the Z20LET with a metal head gasket and everything, like metal exhaust gasket, the whole lot. I find that if you ain't going to go OEM, Victor Ryan's is the absolute best you can get now. The OEM GM ones are actually a mix and match of the Victor Ryan's gasket, so they'll use the same metal gasket. That's the Victor Ryan's one that comes in the OEM one. Alright, the actual, this one for the rocker cover is not the same. That's similar to the L-ring one, which I don't normally use. These are the same on the GM ones, and the head gasket, the most important part obviously, this part here. If you get a GM head gasket set, well you will now, you'll see that it actually has Victor Ryan's written on it in blue, so you can just about see it in there, and that would be exactly the same in the GM one because they supply it for them. So the actual head gasket itself is exactly the same. Obviously that's the main part. Other little bits are different, like the actual metal fibre ones that are actually on the GM ones, but these ones don't leak, they're absolutely fine, and the inlet ones are slightly different as well. But these have nice big ports on them, that's why I like to use them with the ported manifolds, so they're perfect to use, and obviously you get the seals for the back. I'm going to go with the head bolts as well, Victor Ryan's ones. So also I'm going for the GM ones for the actual sump themselves, so I'm going to be changing them. So you can see this is the top and bottom sump, and the reason I'm changing them is because they get hard and start to weep over time. Now if you change them for these actual GM gaskets, you won't have no problems with them leaking again. So you can see here like a multi-channel design. If you get like an L-ring one, they're just nowhere near as good. So if you're going to change these, they don't need to be changed very often. Just go and get the actual GM ones. Now I get everything here from Nevlock Performance because they've been helping me out for a long time with their parts, and they supply me some quality parts at good prices. So if you ain't check them out, go and check them out. They also supplied me with a nice brand new GM header tank. This is a genuine Vauxhall one. Don't try buying the pattern ones, they're absolutely useless. The thread at the top here is no good for the cap. Also supplied me with a brand new GM tank cover, so you can see that's a proper one, and they screw on there nice and tightly and properly seal, because obviously the head gasket's gone, it's compressed that and made it into like a bubble. You might as well change them while it's there. They're only cheap. So before we put this head on, it's time to check over this bottom end. So it's a completely stock bottom end. It's done a lot of miles, but it's absolutely perfect. So I've checked all the lip, the bores, everything. There's absolutely no scores in it. You can see there. You even see the home marks in it. This engine's been looked after really well. It's actually a low mileage engine as well, really. If you think about how old the cars are, it's done 70,000 miles. You can see, as you see, the head gasket had gone on this port here between the waterways, and a little bit of water gone in here and actually cleaned up the carbon. But you can see here there's a lot of carbon on the pistons, which I'm not going to leave on there because that's just going to increase the compression ratio, cause problems, and it's also going to increase the depth threshold as well. These carbon bits, they just heat up over time. Obviously this has never been apart, so the pistons are going to get cleaned up now. So going to clean the pistons up, clean this block up, because we want a nice smooth surface for the head gasket to seal on. So now I've just brought the pistons up to the top dead centre. You can see how nasty the carbon deposits are, and they'll be inside your engine if that's never been apart. It almost looks like damage, but when I remove it all, it will all come apart and it will break off and your pistons will be nice and clean. So I've had these soaking in the last couple of days while the engine has been apart, which will soften up that carbon a little bit. We're going to get to cleaning that up now. Right, so I've just cleaned up one of the pistons. You can see the difference between the two. Absolutely night and day, but I'm not going to go too mad on this because I normally would get these to like a polished finish, but as I say, these are stock pistons, so there's absolutely no point. If there was a forged piston, having a polished finish on there will prevent this carbon build up in the future. It's one of the reasons that it does build up. It's quite smooth on there at the minute, so should stop the carbon build up for a lot of years to come. But you can see on the matte finish that it gets from the factory, it builds up really easy. But it has done 70,000 miles. I'm going to get on to doing the rest of the 3 of them now. Clean them up a little bit. That one shouldn't be that difficult because it's had some water in the cylinder, and water does clean off the carbon. So let's get to doing them. Right, so there we go. All 4 pistons now have been cleaned and decarboned. You can see how nice they look. Much better now without the carbon deposits all over them that would have just caused issues in the future. Well worth cleaning them up and spending a little bit of time on them. So you can also see that I've decked the block. Block's nice and fresh now. All the gasket material that was on it has all been removed. So now it's really the most important part, and that is going over all these threaded holes for the head bolts with a special tap that I've got, and digging all the rust and the nasty crud and oil that's in there. You can see that just fits in there perfectly. So I'm going to go over all the head bolts now, make sure they've all thread tapped, make sure they're all clean for the head bolts to go in. The last thing you want is a head bolt locking up and stripping. Right, so that's the last of the holes that have been thread tapped now. You can see how clean they are. Now, these are being just chased. These threads are just being chased. They're not being recut. So there's no metal being cut off the block. But you can see, you know, you can just turn them by hand now. When they're oiled up, a little bit of grease on them. For the head bolts, they're going to go in nice, torque up perfectly. So that's exactly what you want. Make sure you always chase them thread bolts because they get rusty, they get oil in them, they get grit in them, and they won't torque up properly. Right, just before we put the head onto the head gasket, you can see here, this is how the head gasket's supposed to fit. Now on this right hand side here, try and find it there, you can see it says top. Now, because it is possible to fit this on the wrong way round, and I have seen it done before and it's been leaking like loads of water out the back of the block or whatever. You can actually fit these upside down and they will actually go like that. And that is obviously the wrong way to do it, but most of it does line up. You can see here the head bolts and everything line up, but it will leak water. Right, so then bolts are all just done up to 25 Newton meters, and you can see here what I've just done is I've wrote down the head bolt torque sequence on the head just so that I don't even have to think about it. And a little tip that I showed you before, I'll get some Tipp-Ex and I marked the bolts at 12 o'clock, as you can see on all the bolts, just so you know that you haven't missed any. These have got to be done up from 90, 90, 90 and then 15 degrees. So that's all seated on the head now. We're going to get to torquing these down properly and the head's back on. Right, so one thing I get asked about a lot on these cars is how to do the cam belt timing. So I'm going to run you through how I do it quickly. Obviously, I've just bolted the head on, so now we've got to do the cam belt timing. So I'm going to just quickly run you through the tools you need. There's not many. How I do it and how you can do it safely so that it works absolutely perfectly. So first off, you can see I've marked up the pulleys and I've marked up the cam cover itself. So they ain't lined up yet. I'm going to put in the tool, but you can see this is the timing mark for the cams. So top dead center for the cams is here and here. This one's nearly lined up. This one needs to be moved a little bit. So one essential tool you absolutely need is one of these timing tools. They slot in between the camshafts and they hold the camshafts in place so they don't move around when you're trying to do the cam belt. It's an absolute nightmare because the exhaust one wants to move about and it's not exactly in line. You're going to have a nightmare. So just get yourself one of these. They're not dear. I think they're about 15 quid. This is an alloy one because I use them with alley pulleys mainly, but you can get steel ones as well. Just don't use the steel ones with the alloy pulleys because you will destroy them. Right, so once you've lined up your cam pulleys exactly like that at TDC, you can then put in your cam locking tool. You want to make sure it slots in nicely so there's no like tension on it or you're absolutely smashing it or whatever, and that will just sit in there nicely, and now that's going to hold them pulleys at TDC perfectly, so we can just worry about getting the crank now. What I've also just done is remove the spark plug out of #1 cylinder, and then you can just verify that the piston is at top dead center. Right, so now next thing you want to do is you want to get the crankshaft to top dead center. So you can see here, this is the crankshaft timing mark. I'll zoom in a little bit for you. So you can see I've just put some Tipex on that part there. So that's the TDC mark for the crank. And then you can see on the cam belt cover, there's like a V notched out just there. And you can see they line up perfectly. But what I normally do is I turn the crank slightly off. So you can just do this by hand because these engines turn over nicely. So I'll turn it slightly off. And that allows for some slack in the cam belt. I'll show you what that means in a minute. And then once that cam belt's on, you can just turn it slightly back again, like so, back to TDC. And then that will take all that slack out of that right hand side of the cam belt so that all the slack is on the tensioner side. Right, so next thing you want to do is obviously put on your cam belt. You've got to put this on before you put this engine mount onto the head, but obviously this one was still on the crankshaft. Leave your tensioner off for now as well. We're going to put that on in a bit. Mainly we're just getting this right hand side of the cam belt lined up now. So you see that I left that crankshaft on a slightly just before top dead center, so that you're going to have some slack in the cam belt, which is here. And then we're going to turn the crankshaft back. That's going to take all that slack out. So now what I'll do to hold this right hand side on so it doesn't slip on the crankshaft again, I'll just get some rubber grips. You can see here, obviously don't use ones with metal, just use some rubber ones, and this just holds it on so you've got a free hand, otherwise this cam belt's going to want to keep coming off. So just line that up nicely, get your grip on there. Right, so that's just going to hold that side of the cam belt on now. So now you can worry about getting the slack out of this side of the cam belt on the crankshaft. Right, so as you can see here, the crankshaft slightly off of the TDC mark, and that's obviously, as I said, to get the slack out of that cam belt side. So just going to turn that slightly, let's try and get it in focus. You just turn that slightly around there, and you can see on the right hand side, if you watch this cam belt, you'll see the cam belt start to tighten up. So there you go. So now you've effectively took all that slack out of the right hand side of the cam belt, so all the slack's going to be on the tensioner side, and now you've got your timing mark sitting perfectly in line with the notch out of the cam belt cover. So you can see there, absolutely perfectly in line. So now that's all timed up, so now we can do the left hand side of the cam belt. Right, so you can see on these tensioners, they have two different timing marks. The left hand side ones for the used belt and the right hand side ones for the new belt. So you can see there's a tiny amount. Obviously this is the marker that marks in between it. You'll see when I get it on, when you tension up the cam belt. Now you want that marker as well on the tension to be sitting there when you tension it up, because a lot of people do it clockwise when you've got to do it anti-clockwise and have it sitting there, which is the wrong way to be sitting. You'll see it when it's all timed up. It should be sitting at about 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, something like that. And then that marker will sit perfectly on the used cam belt side of it. So leave the tensioner off. Now we're going to obviously do this right hand side of the belt. We can get the tensioner on. One thing to notice as well on these tensioners is there's a notch here that sits inside where the oil pump is on the casing, and that stops it going side to side when you're tensioning it up. Now that little notch there that sits on the oil pump will actually sit in there, so you can see where the water pump had gone in the past. There's a bit of antifreeze still there, so you can see it's going to sit there with the two bridges either side, and that's going to stop it going sideways. When that's all tensioned up, you'll see, but the tensioner actually bolts there to the oil pump. I've seen these break off in the past when they've been done wrong, or had the wrong bolts or whatever put into them, or torqued up wrong, and they've actually snapped off, and the cam belts obviously smashed the valves to pieces. So that's where the tensioner sits. We're going to get it all lined up now, and I'll show you it all fitted. Now next thing to do, get this right hand side of the cam belt fitted. So you can see here, you literally just pull it round. Now there's always going to be slack in between these cam pulleys. I'm going to show you how to get that out. So literally just line up your cam belt like so. get it around the water pump, get it around the idler pulleys. Now obviously these have all been replaced, water pumps have been replaced, so it ain't a water pump replacement video. So even with the cam belt on, you can see there's still slack there. You're just going to remove that now by using these cam pulleys. Obviously there's still movement in these pulleys. Right, so them cam pulleys are all lined up still with the locking tool. You can see there, that's took all the slack out the cam belt. So now, just get your tensioner and you can slot that in. Right, so you can see there the tensioner's back on. You see it's just loosely done, like the bolt ain't even done up yet, but you can see the part that I was talking about there that needs to sit in between them two bridges, and that obviously stops the tensioner from spinning. So you can see that sits there nicely. Cam belt's on nicely as well, and we've all got to do now is tension that up and torque it down to spec. So now the tensioner's on, it's a bit difficult to obviously film because it's right between the bulkhead. So what you've got to do now is get yourself a 6mm Allen key. You can see here you can move the tensioner backwards and forwards, and as you do that on the right hand side here, have a look for that, you'll see that moving backwards and forwards as well. So that's going to obviously tell you the mark where we need to tension the belt up to, and then it's a two-handed job, so I'm not going to have to film me doing it, but basically I hold it there at the mark that it's got to be at, the used belt mark, and then I'll torque this bolt down to the correct torque, and that's basically it. But while you do that, you've got to hold it with the other hand, which is why I can't film as well, and it will line up perfectly, and then I'll show you exactly how it sits. So there you go, the tensioner's all in, all torqued down, 20 Newton meters for that bolt, and you can see obviously we've got the crankshaft still at TDC, cam pulleys are still at TDC. So now all we've got to do is remove the cam locking tool and turn the engine over by hand. So you can see here there's no slack on either side, nicely torqued up. I can't really show you down here, but the notch is on the used belt side of it because obviously the used belt is a little bit slacker, so I can't really show you because it's up against the bulkhead, just to show you it is. So we're going to turn the engine over by hand about 3 or 4 revolutions now, just to make sure there's no piston to valve clearance, which there absolutely won't be, but it's a very essential thing that you do this before turning it over on a starter motor, otherwise you can end up smashing your valves to pieces if like tensioner breaks or something stupid goes wrong. So as you just see, I've just turned over the engine by hand. Timing marks are lining up perfectly again. Timing mark on the crankshaft lining up perfectly again. You can see. So you can now tell that the engine is timed and there's no slack on either side of the belt. So you can see in here, nice and tight either side of the belt. Everything's torqued up to spec. So you've officially just timed up the Z20LET engine. So I quickly just want to touch on this subject here on the bottom pulleys, because I've seen some funny pictures lately of all these bolt holes being filed out, and it's absolute mess. So I'm just going to show you quickly before you're tempted to do it yourself. These bolts are an eccentric pattern, they ain't exactly square. So you can see obviously the bolt holes here to here are a different size from sideways. So you can see when you turn the actual pulley itself, the bolt holes won't line up. They'll only line up in one position. So you can see here they're not lining up there, and they don't all line up there, and you just got to keep spinning it till you get to this perfect position that they all line up on. So obviously while the coolant temperature sensor housing was off, it's a no-brainer to just change this out for a brand new one. Obviously these engines and most of the engines use the coolant temperature sensor as a critical part of the engine management system. Put a fresh gasket on there, a new sensor, new header tank, refresh the whole lot. So with most of the inlet side of things all done, before I start doing the exhaust side of it, I'm going to drop these sumps out. You can see the original gaskets on this, and you can see they're leaking around the top here. Obviously it's mainly the top one that's leaking, but you're going to do them both at the same time because we have both of them, and also this O-ring seal in here. Obviously I've got to take off that exhaust system, so there's no point putting the turbo on. So we're going to get the car up in the air now. To clear the subframe, the engine actually has to be jacked up, so you can see there you can't get the sump at that subframe. So what you've got to do is you've got to remove this engine mount here, jack the engine up just enough to get the sump out. So we're going to do that now. So I've just pulled the sumps off, and you can see it's actually got the balancer shafts in it still. That's what the balancer shafts look on the Z20LET engine. Obviously the Z20LEH doesn't have the balancer shafts because they was not needed. So what they did is they put a dual mass flywheel in instead, and then on the performance engines we removed the balancer shafts and the dual mass flywheel, just run a lightened flywheel. I've been running that for years, and I don't care really what people say on all the forums and whatnot. I've never had any issues. We've run massive power with them. I mean, you can make your own mind up, but balancing these engines, but then they don't suffer nowhere near as bad as other engines with their harmonics. I've tested and tested and tested them. It looks like it's got a light and flywheel in that actually, by the looks of that. I just noticed that. So yeah, it's got light and flywheel in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop off this pickup pipe as well, because you can see it's the original pickup pipe. It's never been changed or anything. It's got a little bit of material in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that off, and I'm going to replace the seal as well up here, and then change the sump gaskets. So you can see the sump gaskets are absolutely knackered. They're just falling apart, you can see there. So they've had their day, but they're the original ones. They've done 70,000 miles, so I think they've done pretty well. Right, so now I've got the fun task of cleaning up these sumps. I'm not going to get them spotless, there's no need. Loads of carbon inside the engine anyway, but just going to clean them up, get all the oil and that off them, make them a little bit more presentable, and then jet wash them out quickly, get any grit or anything out, make sure they're spotlessly clean before they go back on. Right, so when it comes to sump gaskets themselves, I will only ever use genuine OE items. So you can see here, these are actually GM items. This is the upper one obviously, and this is the lower one. You can see the difference in them if you look them side by side. They've got like a different channel design, very similar to the rocker cover gasket. If you fit these, they won't never leak again, if you do them properly obviously and torque them to spec. They'll never leak, just like they did it from the factory, and they started leaking, you know, when you start fitting pattern parts or cheap parts or didn't fit them properly. Another thing that you cannot fail to replace when you're doing these sump gaskets is this seal here for the oil level sensor. If you don't replace that, that's going to leak. It's going to just come out of there, start leaking down here, and it looks like it's a sump gasket, but it actually ain't. So make sure you've got that as well. I use GM ones as well with that, because they're, you know, far superior and they never leak, as I say. And the same with rocker covers. If you use a GM item on a rocker cover, it won't leak again. They've got that channel design, like I said. You can see in there, it's like a multi-rib design, far superior to the L-ring ones. If you've got L-ring ones fitted and they're leaking, just fit some GM ones and they won't anymore. Right, so both sumps are finally cleaned up. That's about as clean as I'm going to get it for now, without going to the extreme and start painting and stuff. I haven't got time for that in a minute. So fresh new gaskets on there. We get this back on the engine now, stop them oil leaks and get some oil in it. So as I said, the sump needs the engine to be lifted up to clear the actual subframe itself, and you can see here it actually clears it now. You've got plenty of clearance over there because obviously the balancer shafts. A little trick that I use is I jack the engine up and then I just put a block of wood underneath the engine mount. So you leave the engine mount in, just put a block of wood underneath it that supports it, and then you can just jack it off, pull the block of wood out, let the engine back down, put it back straight back into its mounts, and it's an easy job. Oh, and by the way, before you decide to start jacking the engine up, you need to remove this front gearbox mount here, otherwise it won't jack up enough to get the sump off. So obviously one of the most important things, first things I do with any car that comes in really, is a boost leak check. One of the most important things in these cars, because obviously they run an airflow meter, and the amount of air going into the engine, if it's leaking out the boost pipes, it's going to have unmetered air everywhere and the fuel is going to be wrong. You can tell here, pressurizing the system to 30 psi and holding it nicely. So you can hear the air pressure coming out of there, the fuel pressure regulator. So boost pressure is absolutely perfect inside, nothing leaking out. This one's good to go. So obviously these are the service parts that are going on in the car. So we'll go GM with everything. So just got genuine GM oil filter. These are long life ones, so they last for ages. Absolutely the best filtration, obviously. And they're only cheap. I think these are like £3 each or whatever. Iridiums, you know, I love the iridiums. These are the codes for the ones that I use. Everyone asks for what plugs I use. These stage 3, stage 3.5, I switch over 7s. You can see these are grade 7 ones. Before that, you can just use stock VXR grade 6 ones. And then, you know, up to 400, over 400, you want to go to a grade 8. There's not really ever any need to go to a grade 9 unless you're running 600 plus, which most people never are genuinely. We've got a proper genuine cap now this time. I'm going to show you the comparisons between the two and see why the other one was leaking. It was totally the wrong cap for the car. Antifreeze, as you know, and then the best gearbox oil. Obviously, you want to change your gearbox oil every now and then. Don't know what gearbox oil's in this, so doing a change, doing everything at the same time. CRX 7590 NT Plus, this is the stuff I use. If you're going to go for an LSD one, you want to have LSD obviously in there, so it'd be CRX 7590 NT Plus LS. It's got a friction modifier in it, perfect for quaif diffs, not so much for locking diffs, but clutch plate diffs, you're going to have a friction modifier in the oil. Obviously we're going to go for 1040 Mobile 1 oil. I always use this, used it in really high power cars. Perfect, never uses any oil and never causes any bearing wear. GM fuel filter, that's the part number for that one. You get with clips with it, so these are just that extra high flow and they last longer as well. Right, so here we go, the engine's all back together. You just had the final start up. We took it out for a test drive as well and checked everything over. Got a nice fresh head tank on there now, all the systems bled up. So I hope you've enjoyed the video of changing the head gasket. If you have, drop us a comment, let me know what you want to see in the next video. The engine's running absolutely perfectly. Hopefully this helps you if you're doing your head gasket yourself, doing the cam belt yourself. Right, so the car's just come off a cold start. You can see there's a lot of condensation still on the coming out the exhaust system. We're going to give it a little rev just so you can hear the exhaust. It's obviously got a lot more compression now than it did with that compression going into the water system. Yeah. So obviously, just for the people out there, be assured that that's just condensation coming out of the exhaust. It's freezing cold at the minute. It's just rained. Yeah.